this is the presentation I'm talking about. This time we're just going to talk about the high assurance part of it. So I'm going over that bootstrapping process that I went over last time. But the point of focusing on high-level assurance is that we need these self-issued tokens, particularly in the healthcare field, to have this strong level of both identity proofing, authentication proofing, and we also do federation proofing, but that's sort of automatic in the background, and the user doesn't really know that it's going on. Kantara has been doing identity assurance assessment criteria for a long time, and we have them now for IAL2, 2 and 3, AL, FAL, and we have a list of accredited service providers. We are also preparing comments to see how that's going to roll into Rev 4, and so we'll probably have other pieces that come along. When I talk about device assurance, we're thinking that this same process that Kantara is using today for identity authentication and federation assurance could be used for device assurance as we go forward. The key to this is what we call the mobile assurance statement, which is a spec that we're working on. It's kind of like the software statement, except it's taken up a level to add additional information. The idea is that when the user gets the native app, they still have some other processes that they have to go through in order to make sure that they meet the criteria. These are those steps you go through there. The last step, by the way, is something that would happen dynamically, and this would be a proof of presence statement. Once you have the assured application running on the phone, you can trust that application to do a proof of presence, which is primarily through one of the user gesture operations. So we could add a proof of presence statement as well. The distributed identifier assurance is a process that we use instead of the OpenID identity assurance. And this is done so that we don't have to pass information along to get that. And this is basically a spec that allows us to go to one provider of identity in a medical case, use that identity somewhere else. So once we've done identity proofing at one site, we can take an assertion from that identity provider and take it to another provider and let them use it at that site. Next slide. And the working assumptions are that we don't need identifiers to start up a conversation. You can start the conversation, and then once you've decided you want to deal with that site, then you can start going through the process of identifying it. And this involves a two-step process. One is to say that you want to connect to the site at all, which means that you look at their terms and conditions and you accept them or not. And then once you have done that, then you send them an identity assurance token, just like the one I was talking about before. And then you can be connected with all of those assurance levels that you had. Next slide. So this is, in the way we work with things, we don't talk about clients versus registry servers. We just say that all of the websites are essentially the same, and that the site that's receiving data in 1 millisecond can be the one that's sending it in the other millisecond. So basically, we just look at this is very user-centric, and there's a cloud of these other services that are up there. In the medical industry, these are all medical providers, and that one medical provider can be the source of medical records in one case. The user can get the data from them and then pass it on to another medical service provider. The reason that we're dependent upon federation in this case is that before the user can send medical data to a provider, the provider has to make a strong statement to the user that they in fact will continue to protect the user information at the same level of protection that they do in any other provider. In that case, we're just using the entity statement from the federation document and bearing that information inside that entity statement. So slide 8, the user creation of context with the provider. That I talked about a little while ago. It's the user gets the app, establishes the identifier of their own. This is either a DID or just a GUID. The mechanism isn't important to us. And then they bind that identifier to the medical records. You'll also notice that we allow for something like resolution. In the medical industry, we call this a medical records locator service. Slide 9. So what's supposed to happen after this use case gets done? The user now can take these claims anywhere they want within this federation and not have to proof themselves at every place that they go, which can be a major problem, particularly in the day of COVID. So now that they can just switch the health data between any site at any time they want, this would have been extremely valuable when COVID tested starting, because we wind up with people using fax machines because they couldn't get the data any other way from one provider to another. The point is that now, if we can do this within a federation, then the user data is never outside of the protected zone. The user knows that their data is always being protected and always in a safe place. If you look at 12, slide 12, the high assurance token is the token that I was talking about before. The user is sometimes not in control. That's one of the things in medical in particular is that sometimes you have to break the glass. And when you break the glass, you have to have a way to get the medical data right away. We do this with what we call situational authentication. That is, the EMT would have situational authorization to break the glass. When he did break the glass in this way, the user should get notification that in fact the data was released under these conditions. We are actually building a use case for that, and we have that fairly well developed already. You can go to the next slide. So each federation then, in our case, the Care and Alliance has produced a specific best practices, and then everybody in the federation has to agree to the best practices. This is an idea I'm trying to get involved in the NAP organization as well, that we have this in there. Within the medical industry, there are several layers of protection of data, so that even within a federation, you might have different layers. That, for example, in the case of medical industry, you have the ability to download data, which is level 1. Level 2 is the ability to exchange data between sites, unrelated sites. And level 3 is where you actually have data on your phone or in your home that you want to send up. You have to send it up with provenance in order for that to be entered into the electronic health record, and that's done by meeting the FDA requirements. Go to the next slide.
This is the last slide that I've got.
That's the last slide. Okay. So that's sort of the approach that we're taking and the product that we're building. So far as, up till now, the only differences with Section 7 is that in our case, we used the subject as the persistent user identity. We could switch that, but we also added these little mini tokens inside of the user ID token. So those are basic differences from what we have versus what's in Section 7 today.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Okay.
Is there any questions on this one? So I guess it's related to fire and something like that as well, right? FHIR. And is there any relationship with works which is being done by the Heart Working Group at OpenID Foundation?
Yeah, so the Heart Working Group has tried to restart a couple of times. They didn't have the last meeting. I've been trying to get them to actually generate some of these documents for us. we sort of need to get this thing through, and they seem to have gone quiet again. We'd certainly like to work with them, but only if they're active.
So my board member hat on, I'll look into the situation.
Yeah, Debbie is the one that was running most of it. Eve's too busy.
Yeah, and Debbie's changed her job as well, right? She moved out from
So
OCA.
these other tokens that I've been talking about, things like the mobile assurance token. I mean, we can develop that in Kantara, I guess, but we were hoping that Hart would do some of that and put it within OpenID.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of tokens that we need, and if it isn't Hart, maybe we could figure out where they belong.
Is it healthcare specific or?
We're building it so it works with healthcare. It shouldn't be healthcare specific, though. I think that the DIF is looking at doing something like this as well.
Mm-hmm.
We think that it should work with them as well.
Yeah, right. So that was a very good point. And Don Thibault, our ED executive director, told me a couple of hours ago that we're close. Actually, we're just waiting for the signed document to come back from DIF. So the liaison agreement is basically there.
Well, if OpenID would like to build this device assurance token, I'm sure Kantara would not object. We don't think that that's our forte. I mean, we can do it if we have to, but we're not standards makers particularly.
Right. Yeah, we should figure out the most effective way.
Okay. Well, that would be the one I'd start with, a mobile assurance token. And because we think that Kantara is the right organization to create the service criteria for that.
Yeah.
But we will only develop the formatted document if we have to.
Yep.
Okay.
Another question I had was the relationship between this one and I think Tony is still here. The identity assurance spec that EKYC IDEA working group is working on.
Well, I had an argument with Torsten when he created that. I told him that he had the wrong approach, and he wouldn't listen to me. So the difference in our approach versus theirs is that their approach is to violate the GDPR, and our approach is to try to not violate the GDPR, and to not send a lot of data. So that's the way they're quite different.
Well, I don't know, because they can also do the selective disclosure.
No, the EKYC stuff requires you to dump your guts out. And that's what we didn't like.
Actually, there was a request from EKYC working group to the EB Connect working group for making an extension to the user info endpoint so that it can actually do the
So they're doing that after the fact. So the problem is how you start the whole process. When you start the whole process with EKYC, you have to, give them your firstborn child or something. We took a different approach that we're saying that if you are registered with a provider, you can take that somewhere else. And banks used to do this, by the way, and I told Horston that banks used to do this, and you didn't need to do this to go from one bank to another bank, but he wouldn't listen to me.
So Tony, you had some comment?
No, I'm just saying we don't believe we violate GDPR at this point in time with EKYC.
I know, and you didn't, because what you did is use the banker's exclusion piece. So that's I'm sorry, but I don't think that's kosher. That's like saying we obey the GDPR by violating it openly and upfront with you. And that sounds backwards. We don't do that.
I'm not the place for this argument.
Well, that's why we didn't use the OpenID identity proofing document. We created our own. And by the way, it's based, there's almost always physical presence to create the first identity assurance statement. And then what we do is we just allow that to kind of trickle down through the path so that the other people that are in the path can use that assurance and say, okay, well, I'll accept that assurance.
Does it have to be the physical presence?
We're having a discussion about that right now. Today, we believe that it's always physical presence.
In this COVID kind of era, the physical presence is becoming more and more difficult.
Yeah, well, it still is true. I don't think you can get an initial connection without physical presence, even today. I'm not sure whether that'll ever change.
Well, it depends on what kind of credential you actually have. You have of course, I mean, if you have the biometrics enabled thing,
well, when you're in,
credentials, yeah.
Well, typically what happens when you go to a provider for the first time, they ask to see, let's say, your driver's license, your insurance card, and typically a credit card. So there's several problems with those today, but we think that they can be improved a little bit. One of the things that has to happen is that with the driver's license and the credit card, they go offline and they go online and check them online, so that they know that this is really a valid driver's license, and they know that the credit card is working, and they know that the insurance card is actually still active. And with those three things and those, online verifications of them, they will create a record for you. And what we're saying is we'll take that evidence of that record in a QR code and use that evidence to let you get into any other doctor. Then you can do it online. So once you've done the in person, then you have the credentials you need to go online any place.
Okay. I can't find it in the chat right now, but somebody wrote about MDL.
Yes, so we think that we're also doing the work for MDL in Kantara too, the assurance part of that, and we're trying to figure out this particular mobile assurance spec should apply to the MDL as well. And as a matter of fact, we should be able to interoperate between the MDL and use that within the medical industry fairly quickly. If we got this thing in place and it worked for both MDL and medicine, it would make things a lot simpler, I think, if we could get those to interoperate. I'm not sure where we are on the MDL stuff. That's some other group.
So I think it was Sal. Yeah, Sal, would you like to speak up?
So I think this could be generalized, Nat. It's not very far along. We've kicked it, so I've been working in the Kantara work group where Tom's been developing this stuff and helping a little bit. But I do think that the framework here is able to be generalized to other use cases. It's looking at the requirements in healthcare, but there's a gap around how do you manage that binding with the device, and so I think that I think there's something here for that. So thanks.
It would seem to me that the device would have to be able to pass the same tests that we're talking about in order to be trusted to hold an MBL. So it would, that's just my feeling. Nobody's really told me how they're going to make that assurance, but it sounds like it should be the same.
Tony is an expert in the mobile device or the mobile driver's license work.
Yeah, there's already ISO work. Yeah, there's ISO work going on in holder confidence. There's already a draft document out there, an ISO SC17 working group is producing that document.
Yeah,
So,
I'm pretty sure that's the same one we're talking about starting from. That and the work at UL.
so yeah, so there's holder binding and holder assurance. Those two things that we're looking at, which are different from each other.
Yeah, I hope that whoever's doing this in Kantara will make sure that we're headed in the same direction, because it seems like the same problem.
Yeah, I think it's the same, some of the same problems that SIOP has, or what Tobias was presenting also there today. So I think this is just a common, I think, FIDO has the same issue. So we're all in the same set of boats here.
Yeah, so hopefully we get the same answer, right?
I don't think so, but that's yeah, maybe we will at the end.
Well, we can try anyway.
Let's work towards that.
Yeah.
It really sounds like the same problem in SIOP and medical and driver's license. It seems like, you just want to be able to trust the mobile device.
Right, you've got the same issue, FIDO does no holder binding today, right? So you get a token and you don't know who you're really delivering the token to.
So that's why, I don't know if you saw the distinction when I was talking about mobile, but when we do the first mobile binding, we're just checking whether or not the mobile device is trustworthy to hold a secret. And then the second step, or the third step actually, is the proof of presence thing, where you use some sort of user gesture and pass that along as well.
Yeah, and now that Apple is giving attestations or will give attestations, this may be a issue that could be solved on all platforms.
Yeah, I hope so. And we're assuming, by the way, that we're using the key store for all the secrets, which limits some of the cryptography, obviously, but we're willing to accept that limitation. I think you basically just got RSA and EC.
Yeah. Any more discussion on it?
Well, Nat, would you look at where the mobile device, the mobile assurance thing might wind up?
You mean in this presentation?
No, I meant where it might wind up in terms of developing it. I mean, we can keep developing it in Kantara, but if you guys wanted to do it, I'm sure we'd be happy to.
Yeah, mobile assurance. Okay, let's take it offline, but there are a couple of places that I can think of. All right. So if there's no more questions to Tom, then we can go to the next